Good evening, guys and girls. This is temaniadams, and this is my recap of day 16 of the R. Kelly trial. Today's recap is brought to you by Vogue Hair because life is too short to have boring hair. The witness that was on the stand was Diane Copeland, who is the former assistant to R. Kelly. She worked for him on and off for about 15 years. Now, as previously stated, my recap is in the order that the witness testified to, not in chronological order. I can't help that because I want to go in the order that the witness gave the information. So, first, she talked about a lot of different things that working for R. Kelly, what her duties were, what they weren't. She did state that there was a general rule in the house that you could not just roam around his house. You had to, and you also had to knock before you entered any room. That was a rule set in place by his wife at the time. While his wife was only in the house for 2 years, that rule stayed in place throughout the entire time she'd worked there. She even though she was his personal assistant and could go throughout the house, she still had to knock before going into a room. She also talked about she talked about a lot of things about the tours, the tour buses, the girls, and just the policies and procedures that he had in place. She went to work for him and came back and came back and came back. On the last time she went back because there was so much money missing. He didn't know where any of his royalty checks were going. He didn't even know what his social security number was. So her role was probably trying to figure all of that out. She also talked about basically she never saw any girls having to like urinate in buckets. There were no locked doors. The girls could do whatever they wanted. They had plenty of staff to go get them food, go get them whatever they needed, took them shopping, the whole nine. She also talked about his schedule. She said he would like get up and play basketball pretty late at night, and he would play for hours, and then he would go into the studio. So pretty much there were like people at his house all times of the night. His day would pretty much get started at 4 p.m. because he wasn't going to bed until the morning time. And he would have lots of people at his house, including other recording artists, which included Whitney Houston. And she said, God rest her soul, when she testified that. She talked about the different properties that he had, so on and so forth. Again, she didn't see any locked bedroom doors. She talked about many of R. Kelly's long-term girlfriends who would come and go from the house. She said that all the girls would come and go as they pleased. Some girls would break up with him and come back, and that happened on numerous occasions, but no one was being held against their will. If you remember from the Surviving R. Kelly documentary, one of the girls was Dominique. She talked about Dominique came and left. There was another girl named Sarah. She said Sarah never stayed in the house, but she would stay in the hotel when she came. And part of her duties was like making sure that the girlfriends had security, that they got everything that they needed. His girlfriends would call him daddy. And there was like some type of issue. I think his name is Canick, Mr. Kelly's defense attorney, was trying to cross-examine on the term daddy and what that meant and all kind of stuff. But the judge really wouldn't allow it because I think she felt like they were kind of beating a dead horse because they'd already gone into that like several weeks before. And he said, she also testified that anytime that a woman came into the room, R. Kelly would stand up. So the prosecutors kind of made a big deal out of that, but that was just his standard practice. When a woman came in the room, he would stand. He also talked about like the girls had Uber accounts, Uber Eat accounts, so they really had no reason to not go without food. And also when she would go shopping with the girlfriends, if there was a male sales associate, she would talk to that sales associate, but there was a female sales associate, the girls would talk to that associate themselves. She would also dress in baggy clothes when they went shopping, but she testified that was her choice, not Mr. Kelly's choice. Next, she testified for quite a while. Let me back up. Today was only a half day of testimony. We didn't get started to about 12:30. We went to about 6. But today it was quite eventful. I have lots of notes from today, so it was even though it was shorter, it was a nice long day of testimony in that regard. She also testified that even like his regular guests, not even just his girlfriends, no one was free to roam his home. And I think that's pretty standard for anyone. Like, you don't just want anyone walking through your house. So that's what they were brought out in cross-examination. They also talked about how he, afforded his girlfriends this great, wonderful luxury lifestyle. He paid for their plastic surgeries, all their designer items. Pretty much they got everything that they wanted, so on and so forth. They had a Sprinter van, and the Sprinter van had curtains in it, standard blackout curtains. And, she testified that was for a safety thing, and that when they went to certain places, like let's say arenas or concerts or whatever, one of her job duties was to go find out where the bathroom was, so that when the girlfriends or R. Kelly had to go to the bathroom, she could escort them there because she'd already figured out where the bathroom was, versus her escorting them to the bathroom for some type of control issue. One of the questions on cross-examination was about Joycelyn Savage and Mr. Katnick. I hope I'm not butchering his name. He said, and they're still together, aren't they? And she didn't know the answer to that, but that is like a juicy tidbit, because I think on one of my first videos, I talked about Joycelyn's parents being there and the possibility of Joycelyn testifying on R. Kelly's behalf at the trial. So if they're still together, there's a very, very good chance that she will be a testifying witness for the defense. Hopefully the government's case will end very soon, within the next day or so that we can see who the defense witnesses are and know what the defense really is. She also talked about R. Kelly had a female bodyguard by the name of Candy, who was in charge of protecting the girls. There was a situation where a girl named Anna was at the gym, LA Fitness. R. Kelly was inside playing basketball, and the young lady was outside, and she had to use the bathroom, and she was calling Mr. Kelly to get permission or whatever it was to go to the bathroom, and he wasn't answering. Diane was saying, hey, just go ahead and go, and she was like, no, I have to call Robert. So the gist of it was that at the end, Robert was upset with his assistant for not heavily persuading Anna to go ahead and go to the bathroom. So that just goes to the storyline of he made girls wait or get permission to go to the bathroom, because that shows that no, he was okay with them going to the bathroom, and he was pushing his assistant to let them go to the bathroom. Other than that, there was another time when Anna smoked marijuana at Rob's home, and that was a violation of his rules, and that might be a violation of many people's rules. Like, people don't want people smoking in their house. So Diane told Mr. Kelly, and Anna left, and they had a fight, but she ended up coming back. There was a term that was used as far as last week, where in the press, there was a situation where they were saying, R. Kelly had told his staff, you let this person escape. And on cross, Diane said, no, R. Kelly never used the term escape. She was just repeating what someone else said. So that wasn't a term that he said, despite all the headlines. She worked for him about 15 years. She never saw anyone held against their will, locked in a room, having to use the bathroom in buckets. The girls were living a great life, so on and so forth. And she never saw them denied water, food. And there was just a lot of questionings about that. And she was concerned initially about testifying about how she would be portrayed in the media, but she was no longer concerned about that. And she also said that R. Kelly didn't control much of her work. She decided whether or not she was going to work for him or not. And that was pretty much it. She wasn't a bad witness for the defense at all. She really wasn't. If anything, she kind of helped, because she clear, she stated, no girls were held against their will. They were free to come and go. they got lavish gifts and had all of these luxuries for being with him, and she talked about how well he cared for his girlfriends. She also testified about R. Kelly not being able to read and write, but they communicated by text message. And so she said that they would initially communicate by text message, and she would help him when someone else was communicating with him by text message, by reading the messages and helping him send messages back. But as technology progressed, he would talk to text, and that lightened some of her load at work. The next witness was Angela, because Angela's not her real name, but that's how they had to refer to her in court. Angela is 44 years old. She's from Chicago, and she was in high school, but she ended up getting her GED in 2008, and now she works as a clinical massage therapist. This witness had a lot to offer. She was definitely a government witness. She was extremely prepped for trial, and based on her tone and the aggression she had when testifying, you could tell that whatever experience she had with Robert, she was still very, very hurt. So she calls him Rob. She met him in 1991 between her freshman and sophomore year through her friend Tiffany. They went to his apartment, and let's back up. She was a singer and dancer, and she wanted to do either or. So her friend Tiffany was a singer, and they went to Rob's apartment, her and some other girls, one day. So on this day, they go to his apartment. His brother, Bruce Kelly, was there. His friend, Demetrius Smith, who testified before, who was R. Kelly's tour manager, who didn't want to be a witness, he was there. And Larry Hood, who was R. Kelly's childhood best friend and a former Chicago Police Department officer. They were all at this apartment. And she said that each girl was brought in the room one by one. And not one by one as like one goes in and one comes out, but one goes in and then another goes in and another goes in. So she goes in the room, and there's other girls in the room. Some of the girls were new. Long story short, he told her to get on top of him and straddle him. She said she was kind of hesitant, but she went ahead and did it because she had just met Tiffany 2 days before. And she had just met some of the other girls that day. So she didn't know if she was going to get jumped on or what was going to happen that day. So she gets on top of him, and she's like, well, let me get a condom. And keep in mind, she's 14 or 15 at this time. It was between her freshman and sophomore year. And she gave that age, 14 to 15. So he says, I don't have a condom. And she says, well, I have one in my bag. So they proceed to have sex, and that was that. They also told Yo Mama jokes and played the dozens. Now, this is something that I knew she was really prepped for trial, because the prosecutor said, what is playing the dozens? And she had this super official, it's telling jokes in offensive jokes in a funny way type of answer. Like, who says that? But that let me know that she was really prepped for trial. In regards to other things, she used really technical terms that are not anyone's natural way of speaking. So I was like, oh, they really prepped her, and she really wanted to take everything in, because based on her tone, as I said, she was really hurt. So she really wants to nail him. So that day after they had sex with Robert, she came out, all of the adult men were still there, and she said she saw him practically every day from there. Her and her friend would go meet him. They'd have sex. And she said that she eventually stopped going to school, because one day they were leaving the house and told Robert, well, hey, we have to get to school in the morning. And he said, well, do you want to sing, or you want to go to school? And they said, hey, we want to sing. And so they quit going to school. So there you go. She ended up working for him in an official capacity as a backup dancer on a tour. They also got into this talk about Aaliyah and how she met Aaliyah. I think Aaliyah was 12 when she met her, and that at that time, Robert had told her and Tiffany, who was her friend who brought her to Robert, had told them, well, Aaliyah is the next best thing out of Detroit. She's gonna be really big. So at some point, Robert ended up naming Angela, Tiffany, and this other unknown young lady as a group, and saying that, hey, you all will sing backup for Aaliyah just and be her street credibility, like public announcement was the backup for me. So she talked about that, and it wasn't too much about that. They went on tour. Aaliyah wasn't performing at that time. She was too young, and she was just kind of getting her feet wet and like getting to know the road and so on and so forth. But she and the other girls were performing in some type of capacity. On cross-examination, Mr. Koenig brought out that, hey, in certain arenas, you're too young to perform. And so there was some issues about there was some question about whether or not she was actually performing for him or was she lying. And she was insistent that she was not lying. She was a very, very combative witness on cross, and combative witnesses can turn jurors off. So I don't know if that happened for this jury because we aren't able to see the jury at all. But she was very combative with Mr. Kelly's defense attorney. So that's that. She said they saw one another every day for a few years, and that they eventually, their sex kind of like declined. So she ended up being a backup dancer for him. They're on tour, and Aaliyah's there. So he tells them, you all have to stay in the room. And they ended up going to a party, or killing his entourage, ended up going to a party. They sneak out, and when they're walking back from 7-Eleven, they think they're lost. And they see this group of men, and Aaliyah is freaked out because she's like, oh no, here are these men. It's not, it's late at night. What are we going to do? Robert told us not to leave. Well, it turns out the group of men that was walking towards them was actually Robert. So, and Robert told them, oh no, y'all broke the rules. You got to put out tonight. Now, it wasn't made clear whether or not he said you all have to put out tonight, that was everybody, including Aaliyah, or just her and Tiffany, because he already had sex with her and Tiffany. She told Robert that night she was not having sex with him when it was her turn. He said, okay, well, I'm sending you home. And she said, well, my mom can have me home on a private jet before you can. And so he said he was just kidding, and they continued on with the tour. He also got mad at them another time on tour when they were on tour with Gerald Levert. This was all on the same tour. He had a pool party, and they all went to the pool to hang out, and Robert was upset and came and got them out the pool because he didn't want anyone looking at his girls, and he had a rule that they couldn't communicate with any other artists that were on tour. Also, the name of the group with her, Tiffany, and the unknown young lady was called Second Chapter. When talking about Second Chapter and the unnamed young lady, this witness, Angela, became very emotional, almost crying, but not just full out crying. And there's speculation that Angela is actually the niece of Sparkle, who was one of R. Kelly's proteges and was in the documentary Surviving R. Kelly. But again, they would not use her real name. So I don't know if that's really her or not. But she did state that after their relationship ended, she still would see Mr. Kelly in hanging around and being with Sparkle. So I don't know if this is her niece who was from the original trial or not. But one thing that she also did testify about was that in the Surviving R. Kelly documentary on Lifetime, she did supply them with photos, but she didn't speak. And she said that she was paid a few grand for the photos. But again, she didn't speak, she didn't say anything, but there was like mixed testimony about that. So on cross, R. Kelly attorneys asked, well, you're saying now that he was having sex with you at this young age, and on Surviving R. Kelly, this was the time that everyone was coming out with their story and saying what happened to them. why didn't you say what happened to you? Why didn't you say that you all had sex at that time? And she's like, oh, well, she was just embarrassed at that time. She didn't want anyone to know. Also on cross, there were certain details Mr. Kelly's attorney was asking about, and she's like, I don't know. That was 25 years ago. But on direct, she remembered so many details for the prosecutor. She remembered details about the bank that R. Kelly paid their checks from. She remembered his apartment complex. She remembered the address. She remembered all of those details. But again, on cross, she couldn't remember that many details. She also said that she got paid but not paid for the tour. Like they would get a per diem for food, and they would get paid in cash, because whenever they got paid with a check, she named the bank that they got paid the checks on. She said the checks weren't clear. So she knew a lot of details for the government, but not too many details for the defense. There were other details about Rob's relationship with Aaliyah. I'm not going to go there. That's just it. All right. So next, we had another witness. Let's see. One moment. Sorry. We had another witness who talked about, they were going to call other witness named Jerry or Gary Ortiz. And we had to take a recess for 10 minutes because the parties were going to possibly agree to a stipulation about that witness. Now, stipulation is, hey, we're going to agree to a certain number of facts regarding this witness. So let's just say we have a client who's charged with felony possession of a firearm. The stipulation, this is say the client's felony that made him a felon was aggravated sexual assault of a child. You don't want the government having to prove that he's a felon by proving up his sexual assault of a child charge. So you can stipulate or agree that, yes, he was a felon. So they had to recess to come up with some type of stipulation for this witness. Once we came back from recess, the government was no longer calling this witness. We don't know what the stipulation was. So the next witness was Alex, and Alex is not his real name. But he is friends or former best friends with Lewis, the previous witness for the government from weeks ago. So he is 21. He's from Chicago. He worked at McDonald's after high school, and he met R. Kelly at 16 while he was a junior in high school, and they last saw each other when he was 19. He met him through Lewis, his friend. R. Kelly slid him his number. They would communicate, just kind of check on each other. He ended up going to meet R. Kelly once, and R. Kelly told Mr. Alex to be open. So there was sexual encounters between the two, and they would have sex with women as well. Per Alex, Robert was running the show. He told them what to do, what not to do. They showed pictures of numerous girls, asking if he had sex with this girl or that girl. Some of the girls were like Azriel, Joycelyn, Dominique, several girls who were mentioned in the Surviving R. Kelly documentary. And per Alex, these encounters were captured or recorded on R. Kelly's iPad. He said that when he was recording, R. Kelly was recording after, I think R. Kelly had given him oral sex one time, if I recall correctly. That really wasn't his thing, and but he kept coming back. So they were having these semi-threesomes or threesomes. I'm not sure the appropriate term, but he would have sex with women, and R. Kelly would tell them, do it like you mean it, like moan and kiss like you mean it. And R. Kelly would masturbate while he was recording. He also testified that he would dry hump Robert's butt during this time. And there was oral sex during this time, but it's not clear if Robert was only giving him oral sex or he was also giving Robert oral sex. The girls were told to call Rob Daddy, and he and Alex, Rob, and random women had countless sexual encounters. So from there, He talked about Lewis was his friend. He and Lewis ended up going to jail for robbery. Lewis asked him to help him rob his employer. Also, this witness, Alex, admitted to stealing $8,000 from R. Kelly. It was just a lot, and especially when he admitted that he stole $8,000 from R. Kelly and all these other things. I'm like, why did the government even use him as a witness? Because at that point, it just went south, especially knowing he stole money and he was arrested for robbery, but he was convicted of theft. And I think Lewis had stolen money from R. Kelly as well. It was just not a good situation. He said that he stole $8,000 out of R. Kelly's backpack once when he went in to get something out for R. Kelly. And he also, he didn't feel comfortable talking about this. And the prosecutor didn't appear to be comfortable asking him questions about it. I think that when you're crossing anyone or talking about sex in a courtroom, it can be uncomfortable. But as the defense attorney, if you have to go there, you just have to go there. I remember having a trial in a sex case, and I had to say, my client was having sex with consenting adults. And so I was questioning the witness, who was his probation officer. And I was like, so you mean to tell me, my client, who is a young man who has a functioning penis and is a consenting adult, who is having sex with other people, other women who are consenting adults, it's a problem. Now, who wants to say functioning penis in court? But you have to say it sometimes. You have to go there sometimes to help your client. I went there and I won. But you could tell that the prosecutor and the witness were just not comfortable. But it's just something that had to be done. Alex also testified that his sexual encounters with Robert started when he was 20 years of age. That was the first time. And he stated that he would use condoms sometimes, but he would not use condoms. And when R. Kelly's attorney was crossing him, he ended up yelling out, well, when you're brainwashed for that long, and so on, so on, so on, so. And so on the follow-up question, R. Kelly's attorney asked him a question. The witness said, I object. And we were all like, what? And so, of course, the judge overruled the objection because the witness can't object. And that was pretty much it. Oh, there was also testimony about whether or not he was or was not R. Kelly's stylist or personal shopper, because now Alex said that's what R. Kelly told him to say, that he was his stylist or personal shopper. But in a government report, the witness told the government that he was his stylist / personal shopper. So there are some issues right there for closing. I'm a firm believer in ABC, which is always be closing. So when I think about my closing arguments, I always like to make sure I pull out facts from witnesses to put them in the mind of the jurors, so that when I bring it back up and close, the jurors are like, oh yeah, I remember that. So that's that. The next witness was Lissette Mayweather. Her sister testified last week. They are twins. She ended up going to work for R. Kelly at some point as his personal assistant. And she would work for him 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. When she was off, her twin sister would be working on. She talked about, they referred to Azriel as Jane in the trial. And she said that the girls would call, they refer to his girlfriends as nieces, because girlfriends would refer to them as aunties, meaning R. Kelly's sisters. So that was that part. They also talked about a trip from New York to D.C. before she officially began working for Robert. And she testified about his girlfriends being home with him, Azriel, Dominique, a girl by the name of Juice, a girl by the name of V, and Joycelyn living with Rob, but Joycelyn wasn't living there fully yet. Joycelyn was transitioning to live there full time at that point. So that is the recap for today. Tomorrow we will pick back up with Mr. Mayweather. I am hoping that the government will rest tomorrow, or at least on Wednesday. It appears that Wednesday we may not have a full day. But that's my recap. And don't forget to shop Vogue Hair.